Welcome to Chapter 12, young scholars, in the Business Ethics, from the Business Ethics textbook by Ferrell, Frederick, and Ferrell. Chapter 12 deals with sustainability. I'm sure everyone has a fundamental grasp on what that is by now from this class and others. But it's just the last chapter in this particular textbook. The thing is that we consider it normal now for businesses to practice environmental responsibility and sustainability. In my youth, it was not normal. It was, I don't know if you want to call it cutting edge, but it wasn't well practiced until it became a decision rule that consumers started using when they patronize people, something they thought about. So we're going to talk about sustainability and ethics and social responsibility and those things in this chapter. These things would be commonplace to a millennial, but for non-millennials, digital immigrants, we can remember when there was a crying Indian on a commercial on television talking about litter. Go and Google that. So CSR, social responsibility, and sustainability is where it starts. Sustainability, maximize the good, minimize the bad. That's a pretty good rule for life, really. In business, you might have to find a balance between those things. You don't want to do so much good that it runs you out of business. But you also don't want to run so roughshod over everybody and everything that it creates negative effects on your neighborhood, your employees, your state, your country, your stakeholders. Sustainability. The reason they break these out individually, by the way, is because they're not interchangeable. A lot of people will throw them out in conversation, especially if you watch TV, you'll see that, but they're not. So sustainability, the potential for long-term well-being in the natural environment, including all biological entities, as well as interactions between those two. And then corporate social responsibility, or CSR, which you hear is a buzzword you hear in business quite a bit. And during your business degree, you will hear it come up time after time across all disciplines. So we're looking for an agenda of sustainability. It's a much broader issue encompassing consumer protection, corporate governance, which we talked about a few chapters back, employee well-being, and a number of other topics as well. So they're not interchangeable, different concepts, but they do relate to one another. So why? Why study it? Why care? Because it can create competitive advantage. And in marketing, we always teach what we're looking for, what any business is looking for, is a unique selling proposition and some way to create a sustainable competitive advantage. Not just a competitive advantage. That's good, but if two gas stations across the street from each other are across the street from each other, one of them lowers their price on gasoline by a nickel, they have a competitive advantage for a little bit until the other gas station owner sees that gas and he can lower his by a nickel. Then they're even. Sustainable competitive advantage is something that you have that's it's hard for somebody else to replicate. Word of mouth and word of mouth for item number 2, or widespread. You can be bad mouth. There are a ton of corporate hate sites up. I've done some research in that area. You can look at walmartsucks.com. There are numerous. If there's a large corporation, they've got a hate site directed at them. Untied.com, which is one pointed at United Airlines, and they're kind of fun to plow around on. Can use their products and brand identity, create social value, quality, and consumer loyalty. Look no further than Starbucks for that. Keurig, they're sustainably sourced coffee. They run ads for it all the time about how they pay a fair wage to their farmers, and then they can have a good life where they are. They provide good coffee, Keurig, they put it in the pots, and they send it to me. I burn through about 20 of them a day. And they can differentiate their firms. But you don't want to be in a business that's a Me Too business. You want to be different. Nobody goes into business saying, we want to be the same as Walmart. Well, that space is carved out. Walmart's got it, right? So you're probably not going to win a place there. But if you differentiate yourself a little bit, like Target has, then you can exist in that space even though you're not quite the size. A good example is Subaru, which is owned by Fuji Heavy Industries. Everybody's familiar with Subarus, the cars. They're in the scheme of car manufacturers, they're a niche manufacturer. Just think of how many Subaru dealers there are around you versus how many Ford and Chevrolet dealers there are. All right, very, very few. All their cars are all-wheel drive, and they only make 4 or 5 kinds. And anyway, but they built a plant. They build several cars. The one that I like, which they discontinued, but now they kind of replaced it with the Tribeca, which I own one of. But they replaced it with another one called the Ascent, which is like the anti-SUV. It's a great car. But anyway, they build them in Indiana, and they created a zero waste factory. They make cars and put nothing in the landfill. And that is amazing. There's a bunch of different ways they do it, but it's legit. And this is an article from Scientific American, which they didn't pay for. That's, their public relations people didn't have to gin that up. So there's a lot of source credibility to it because it's it's a scientific publication doing an article on it. But anyway, they use that in their advertising quite a bit, and people who are really attuned to that are fans of these cars made in this Indiana plant. They do all kinds of stuff when they make cars in Indiana and they ship them to Japan, let's say. On the ship goes all the packing materials that they took parts out of to put it together. And in Japan, they will repack parts of those and send them back over until the boxes are worn out, and then they recycle all that. But it's really amazing. So you can see how they've used that to create a sustainable competitive advantage. You can't say, okay, well, let's compete with that, and tomorrow let's make our plant in Flint, Michigan, a zero waste factory. Well, you can't do that. Now, over time, you could if you're a competitor, but that's a sustainable competitive advantage. You can see how they've used being attuned to the environment and sustainability and all to their benefit. So, global environmental issues. What's important to everybody, right? Air pollution, acid rain, which used to be a very hot topic, but not so much anymore because they've taken actions to reduce air pollution. That's when the rain would fall and burn the leaves off the trees, and this, that, and the other. Global warming or climate change. 98% of the world scientists agree with the science and all the experiments that have done with global warming. Sea levels are rising. the argument some people have is it man-made causes? Are they adding to it, or is it just nature, or whatever? I prefer, if somebody wants to get in that discussion, just to agree on the point that it's better not to pollute than it is to pollute. I think everybody can agree with that. If you can't, then we just, you can't really have a conversation. But anyway, back during the George W. Bush administration, countries agreed on the Kyoto Protocol, which is a lot of multinational corporations over the world. It was not popular because they thought it might hurt their business and make them uncompetitive. And following that, they had something called the Cancun Package, which called for industrialized countries to cut their greenhouse gas emissions. And the U.S., China, and Japan didn't agree on the treaty, but they said they would try to cut their emissions, again, because they thought it would, developed countries would hurt them more than less developed countries. And we all know that coal is a polluting energy producer, and it'd be very difficult to build a coal-fired power plant today. It's pretty difficult to build a nuclear one in Georgia because they've just got a mess going on with people building it. But for example, in Poland, that's another country. I believe most of their energy production comes from burning coal, which is filthy. If you've ever been to parts of Kentucky or West Virginia, and everything's got like a slight black greasy coating on it, that's where it comes from. So land pollution, going back to the previous slide with the Indiana plant for Subaru, we know what land pollution is. Waste management, handling your waste, and recycling falls into that. I was amazed. I never did recycle at home because I would have to keep it separately and then take it somewhere and this, that, and the other, until they offered curbside recycling several years ago in my neighborhood, and dropped a can off at my house just to put my recycling in. I noticed that my garbage can, which was always full and overflowing, now only had about 2 bags of trash in, because the rest of it was recycling. And I thought, well, isn't that great? But that's not going in the landfill. That's being, reused. Deforestation, that's a big topic down in Brazil, where they've cut down a lot of forests, of the rainforest, to grow other things. If you want to really see some gross videos, just Google palm oil, which is an ingredient in candy bars. They'll cut down, million-year-old forests to grow palm trees to get this palm oil for, so they can make a Kit Kat, and it really does a number on the environment. Urban sprawl, it's kind of self-explanatory. Biodiversity, where we try not to let plants go extinct because they all have a place in the cycle. There's a seed repository somewhere in Iceland or Greenland. It's under the ground where seeds are kept in case we ever have a mass extinction event or too many plants grow extinct. Then we can regrow these plants that are not genetically modified or anything, just like they were. You can Google the seed repository as well on YouTube and see a story about that. It's amazing that the world has funded this seed repository so that we don't, in the hopes that we will always have a diverse, ecosystem with respect to plants. And then the last one, which is hard to see, GMOs. That's in the news a lot. People carry on about GMOs, GMO this, GMO that. The FDA has not found that nobody has found that genetically modified seeds or plants that maybe they stand up to drought more, or they're more insect resistant, that they're bad for you to eat. In fact, it's increased the output of farmers all around the world, especially in areas where they have food shortages, which we don't have in the U.S., but they do have in other parts of the world. It's an issue that people will protest about. They want it to be labeled on our food if it is, and it's never really caught fire, but it's out there, especially if you're in that business. And so those are things that affect not just the U.S. but the world. But some countries can't do anything about it because they don't have the funds or the resources. We do, but should we spend those resources on that and make ourselves less competitive than a plant in, say, not Uruguay, but Guatemala. Let's say I just made that up. So water pollution. More than 80% of sewage in developing countries is discharged untreated. That's not in this country, but in other countries. Hence, some people argue, why do we constrict ourselves with more environmental legislation that makes our businesses spend more money on that, when in country B, they just flush the toilet and it runs out in the creek, and they're still manufacturing, bicycles, whatever they make. Of course, I don't want the creek behind my house to have sewage in it, but that's just a point that people argue about. Water quality. They talk about there's a big issue in Atlanta in water treatment with people flushing, like wet wipes or these. Everybody makes them now. You pull them out of the tube and you're wiping them. People flush them, but they're not really flushable, so they hang up the machinery at the water treatment plant. They have to shut down, get divers in there, clean all that stuff out. It's really quite a mess and costs a lot of money. Of course, water is important. Everybody needs it. And if you remember going back a few years to the drought in Atlanta, the lawsuits started, litigation about Atlanta drawing water out of Lake Lanier, because when Lake Lanier was built, it was not built for Atlanta to use, but Atlanta's been using it. So Alabama and Florida, because where the river comes out down there is where they need fresh water to mix with salt for the oyster industry. All the farmers in South Georgia need the water, and Alabama also pulls drinking water out of it. So that litigation has been going on for years as to who has what rights to draw water out of Lanier, and then the Flint. I think it's the Flint River that comes out of there. But anyway, water can make people sick, right? Unsanitary water make people sick, and unsanitary because something's been added to it, or extras, just regular use of humans using water in showers and toilets and baths, and companies also discharging effluent. There are several lawsuits going on right now with Dalton as the target. Several city water systems and even the state of Alabama is alleging in court that Dalton carpet manufacturers have been discharging their acronyms, I think PFOS and PFOA or whatever, but anyway, a couple of chemicals from making carpet, and that is getting into their water systems. In fact, this is a picture of Rome. Gadsden City and state of Alabama are suing, I'm not sure if it's the Dalton water system and the carpet manufacturers or not, but it's a big piece of litigation, which you can Google and look at. So suppose that the carpet manufacturers in Dalton lose. Well, that's going to be expensive. right? So if they're wrong and the people alleging these issues are right, then by doing the right thing several years back, they could have saved themselves a lot of money. If the court finds for the carpet manufacturers, then uh, the water still has to be cleaned up for Gaza and Rome and everywhere else. I think Rome quit using water out of that river because of the chemicals that were in it. But it's just something to watch, just something to bring the matter home, because it can be expensive to pollute if you get caught. And the problem is, you can't ever guarantee you're not going to be caught. So, uh, if you make ethical decisions the correct way in thinking about your responsibility and sustainability and your responsibility to the, to the area and the land around you, it might be a better call. So in the U.S., we've got the EPA, right? Which Environmental Protection Agency, which was started in 1972 by President Richard Nixon. And because there were so many filthy areas of the United States, the river in Cleveland, was so polluted it caught on fire. And 3 Mile Island, you can look that up. Anyway, it's tasked with protecting us from environmental risks and protecting our health. So, some businesses will argue that the rules are too strenuous and too expensive because there are manufacturers in Mexico that don't have to adhere to those. You just pump whatever in the water you want or in the air, and nobody says anything about it. Yet we're hamstrung by having to keep clean. Of course, we all know from prior chapters, American business is supposed to operate at the same ethical level, the same ethical caliber, make decisions in foreign countries as they do in the U.S. But anyway, so that's one of the arguments against the EPA. Before the EPA, they make the reason that a lot of the labeling that you have is because of the environmental protection. For years, I grew up in South Alabama on the coast, and where mosquitoes are very heavy. And every evening they would ride trucks down our streets and spray DDT in the air. Before DDT was outlawed because they said it was dangerous, but for decades, they'd ride up, you'd be out playing baseball or something, and there come the fogging trucks, and you were thankful to see them, but maybe it turns out it won't be so good for us, who knows. But they're tasked with making sure environmental legislation contributes to diverse, sustainable, and economically productive. That's always the balance. What we can always be very, very clean, but is it so expensive that it puts people out of business? What is the proper balance? Which is the argument that rages on year after year after year. I'll tell a story about that in a minute. So these are some major environmental regulations. The Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act. Why are endangered species? Why do we care? Again, because every animal or plant has a place in the biosystem. If that animal's missing and another animal feeds on that animal, what happens to the animals up the chain? Just like when small fish eat plastic and then bigger fish eat them, it turns out these big whales have bellies full of plastic because everything they've been eating has plastic. Toxic Substances Control Act. You see all those pictures on the side of barrels of even chlorine or chemicals for your pool or cans of spray paint. Have all the pictures. It's flammable or it'll burn you or it's poisonous. It's skull and crossbones, whatever. All that stems from that. Clean Water Act, which has been rolled back a little bit over the last 6 months. Pollution Prevention Act, Food Quality Protection Act, and Energy Policy Act. So I used to work. I owned an electrical contracting business for years. My brother and I started. We used to do a lot of work with two large paper manufacturers down in Mobile, near Mobile, Alabama, International Paper and Scott Paper. And one time I was out at one of these plants, I won't say which one, they're both similar, and looking at a project he wants to do, and there was another big project going on, way up in the air on cranes. And so I asked a buddy of mine, who's an engineer, I said, what's going on over there? He said, well, they're putting scrubbers in the smokestack to make it, our discharge cleaner because it was polluting too much. I said, well, that's a good idea. We appreciate y'all doing that, because I lived on the bay, not too far from there. And he said, oh, so it wasn't proactive. He said, every year the EPA and the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADM it's called, he said they come through and they give us a list of things that we've got to clean up. And if we want to continue operating another year. And the corporate bosses haggle with the government regulators. They come up with a list that they think they can do and it won't hurt their profits too much, and they do them. I said, oh, well, at least they're doing it. And he said, you know how you'll be able to tell when the bosses think the list is too long or too expensive? I said, how's that? And he said, because they'll shut it down and move. And I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, they already have bought property in Mexico. They'll move the whole plant if the list ever gets too long or they have to spend too much money cleaning up things around here, because paper making is a nasty business and uses a ton of water and discharges a ton of dirty water. So sure enough, today there are no paper mills in Mobile. Both IP and Scott Paper both shut down and moved to Mexico after being there for decades and employed thousands of people. I had, everybody had a handful of friends whose dad worked at one of the paper plants. In fact, you never got asked paper or plastic in the supermarket when you were buying groceries, because they only had paper down there, because a grocery store wouldn't carry plastic, because if a paper mill worker came in there to buy groceries and you try to give them a plastic bag, they quit shopping there and tell all their other buddies. And if you lost the paper mill guys, you'd lose a lot of money, because they made the paper grocery bags in those plants. So that's just an interesting story. So they weren't so much interested in sustainability or CSR respect, because they were just interested. They fixed things when they had to. So they weren't proactive. They were only reactive until they decided they thought it'd be too expensive, and then they shut them down and moved them off. So alternative energy sources, wind power, geothermal power. You can see a drawback that is going on in Hawaii right now, and it involves a volcano. Hawaii has a lot of geothermal plants, and they'll drill, because there's, lava and magma and all sorts of hot stuff, and they'll drill down just below the surface and tap into some of that steam, and they use the steam to run turbines and everything. That's loosely how they work. But all of the geothermal sites near that volcano in Hawaii in 2018 are now not working. Some of them have just been blown over. The other ones are not working at all, so that's a downside for that. Solar power. Everybody's probably got some bit of solar power at their house or at somebody's house, Nuclear power is cheap, because the nuclear rods just over with, and they're radioactive for many years. You have to store them. That's a problem with that. Biofuels, Everybody's familiar with E85 and ethanol. Big in the Midwest because they grow a lot of corn. To put ethanol in the gasoline. Yeah, I've been doing that. Government's been spending money propping that up for decades, and there's still whatever 10% ethanol in gasoline. But there are other kind of biofuels. For example, Willie Nelson runs his tour bus on cooking oil, old cooking oil. And that's what he runs it on. Hydropower, very clean. It's the running water, or a water wheel or a dam runs turbines and creates energy on the backside. However, generally and change the structure of the rivers by doing that. And sometimes they can be very damaging. So again, pluses and minuses with everything. Wind power is very clean, but you have to have a bunch of windmills, in fields. There's a large solar power installation on I-75 between Atlanta and Chattanooga. On the right, I believe, is a Georgia Power one. And as soon as they're working on batteries now to be able to store that. So if you have a couple of rainy days where there's not much sunshine, that they store that power up, then you can use it. And that's the problem. But obviously, that's the way the future is going to work. Not burning oil and coal. They'll eventually run out, but before then, they're just nasty. If you've ever got oil in your hands or picked up a lump of coal, you'll know you won't get it all. And a lot of people will advertise to give themselves competitive advantage that 50% of their energy is clean energy. They may just call it. They won't say exactly what it is. So you can see this little chart. If we use my my paper company example from a minute ago, a couple slides ago, a low commitment deals only with existing problems. That's what they did. They wouldn't do anything if they weren't given a list by the EPA and ADEM as to what they needed to do to keep operating, to clean up some of the filth. They only dealt with existing problems. But they did attempt to comply with environmental laws, but not too much, right? And they didn't have any strategic programs to address environmental issues. They weren't very proactive. They were certainly reactive. Now, is everybody like that? No. Subaru is not reactive. They were proactive. They built, well, actually, they took over half of a plant from Toyota. But they decided when they were going to take over that, they were going to set it up to be 100% clean and not contribute anything to the landfill. That's a proactive strategy versus a reactive strategy. And they use it to their benefit. Whether every company can do that, who knows? Something. But if your manufacturing process is just inherently nasty, you may not be able to spend the money to clean it up and stay in business. But you may be able to, because just by increasing efficiency reduces waste and creates more profit. So you're creating profit for yourself and you're becoming more efficient and less of a polluter. And that's a win-win. And that's the calculus that you're looking for. So two other topics that come from marketing are green marketing. And, everybody wants to be green. I probably should have typed that. So we have green marketing and also fake green, which is called green washing. Now, everybody knows of a product that declares themselves to be green or environmentally safe. You can find cleaning products in the local Kroger that don't have any corrosive chemicals in there. They're green products, and they may lure you to buy them. Or you might want to use a green product, say for dog shampoo, because you don't want to get in your dog's eyes and mess them. It's not mess with them. It's not supposed to. The other side of that are people who just take the product they make and then they say it's green. That's called green washing. That is telling a lie about your product. It's not really made from plant sterols or whatever. It's just the same old cups you've been making. And that may work in the short term. But in the long term, there are people that spend countless amount of hours and single and green, or if they're just spinning a yarn. And when you get busted, it's terrible bad press, and it could put you out of business. As you think about Volkswagen and their diesel emissions problem that they had a couple years ago, where they knew the cars were really emitting more pollution than their reports said they were. They didn't do anything about it. Well, they were found out. And recently they arrested the chairman of Audi. And that could be so expensive. It may not put them out of business, but the fines that are going to have to pay and the people that are going to go to jail are going to be, it's going to be significant. So again, generally it's better to do the right thing than the wrong thing. And to do enough of what you can do, it's not going to put you out of business, but will make a difference to your stakeholders. Because people today tend to be able to want to do business with someone that's not polluting the water and the air and ripping everybody off within some reasonable price differential. If it's the same price, you absolutely will choose that good. Even with a little bit of a premium, you might. Now, the less well off you are, or lower down the socioeconomic scale, you may not care at all. You're just trying to buy food for your family and you don't care whether it's, manufactured sustainably or not. But above that level, people generally care because they want to drink clean water and they want you to be able to drink clean water. So they don't want to, work with a company that's not going to. Anyway, those are the highlights of chapter 12. So enjoy, and I know you will. And farewell for the day.